Well, like I said, we are so honored that you are here with us, and we are in week 3 of this great new series called Brave. And a couple of weeks ago, Pastor Dave introduced this series by talking about a guy named Gideon, which is a real fun, it's a great read, it's a fun read. And if you go back and read the book or the story of Gideon, you won't be disappointed. It's really a fascinating story about that guy. And then last week, Pastor Brett, I'm not Brett, I'm Jeremy. People are always confusing us, all right? I'm much better looking than Brett. But last week, Pastor Brett introduced another character to us named Ruth. And Ruth is a fascinating, fascinating story. And so if you are behind and you want to catch up, you can do that. Go to newlifecc.com, click on messages, and you can catch up with our series where we are now. Excuse me. And you can see how those two people, Gideon and Ruth, have helped shape our history, and specifically how Ruth, the character of Ruth, has actually how she played a role in the salvation of mankind through Jesus, okay? And that's all I'll tell you. If you want to know the story of Ruth, go back and read the story or watch the talk, okay? So as we continue this series on Brave, and we're kind of processing through the different character that I'm going to be talking about this morning to kind of unpack, I want you to take a kind of a crazy journey with me, all right? If you don't have a huge imagination, I need you to stretch yourself, okay? And kind of put yourself into this scenario, all right? So imagine you're living your life, you're in your hometown, wherever that may be, because we have people from all over the place here at New Life, also people watching online. Imagine yourself in your hometown, and all of a sudden, your city, your hometown gets invaded by another country. Okay, it's happened all throughout history, all over the world. Things like that do happen. So imagine your city gets invaded by the enemy, and everybody in your community, everybody in your city is taken captive, and they're kind of scattered all over the place, including you. So you don't have a choice. It's not up to you. I mean, you are a prisoner. You're going to become a slave or a servant to whomever, whatever country it is that is invading your hometown. And you're kind of an important person. You may not be, you may not see yourself as important, but you're kind of an important person. So they send you back to their president to work directly under their president. And so they take you off to their country. And then for the next few years, you serve directly under their president and right inside their government. You have direct contact with him. You have daily access to him. You have regular, everyday conversations with him. And over a period of time, you've actually built a really good relationship with him. He trusts you probably more than anyone else in his cabinet or on his staff. And you've built this great relationship with him. However, a rumor gets back to you in this country that something horrible has happened in your hometown, other than the fact that they've been captured and everybody's scattered out, but something horrible has happened to your hometown. Rumor gets back to you that the church building that you and your family worship together in has been totally destroyed by this enemy. It didn't happen before you left. It happened after you left. This is the place that you and your family worshiped every weekend. So it's a place that your ancestors, your forefathers built this building. It's a place where they and their families worshiped on a regular basis. And now it's been destroyed. And I don't mean just destroyed, I mean meticulously and maliciously decimated. Bolt by bolt, piece by piece, brick by brick, wall by wall, just ruins and rubble. And when you hear this, man, your heart just breaks. And you're kind of frozen, you're paralyzed with emotion. You don't even know what to do. You don't even know how to overcome it. Because you're all the way in this other country, you're forced to serve and work in a capacity that you didn't sign up for. And now you feel hopeless, you feel alone, you feel abandoned. But you pull yourself together. You strategically come up with a plan. You dig down deep for courage and for strength. And with boldness, you approach this president and you make your big request. And you say, look, there's something really important that I need to talk to you about. Now, if you explain what's going on back at home, you continue with your boldness and you say, if you're happy with me, if you're pleased with me, if I've served and I've honored you well, please let me go back to my hometown and rebuild this church. It's so important to me. And so this president looks at you and says, well, how long will you be gone and when will you return? And so you kind of do the math in your head. You figure out kind of a timeline that you can do this, and you give it to him. And he says, okay, you can go. He agrees, but on one condition. He says, you have to come back. You've pleased me so well. You're one of my number one guys. I trust you so much with my life that I need you to come back. And you agree. And not only does he give you permission, but he pays all of your expenses to come back. And he also hires security detail to make sure that you get back safely. And then he gives you all the building supplies, all the materials that you need to make it happen, to rebuild your church. And then, and this is huge, he makes you the mayor of your hometown so that when you get back, you can make other critical decisions for your city as well. So you get back home and you mobilize a huge team of volunteers and you rally the troops needed to make this happen. You get started on the building and you're flying through, you're clipping, everything's going well because you've got a date, you've got a promise that you kept to the king. But guess who shows up? The city officials, the enemy, everyone that showed up and tore the building down originally, they're back and they're not happy. And they're irate and they're upset and they're shouting curses at you to one point where they finally say, if you don't stop rebuilding that church, we're going to kill you. But do you cower down in fear and stop? Nope. You keep right on going. Because you're so focused on this project. As a matter of fact, you gather everyone together and you say, look, from now on, we're going to work with eyes in the back of our heads. Stay focused. Watch your backs. Because beginning tomorrow, I want you to show up. I want everyone to show up armed. We're going to work with one hand and keep our other hand on our weapon because we're not stopping. That's it. That's the end of the story. No, you guys are thinking, wow, that's it. What's the rest? And yes, I do have a huge imagination. No, I'm not an only child. I just had a huge imagination. And this is not the script for the next Mad Max movie. All of this actually happened about 2,400 years ago to a guy named Nehemiah. So if you brought your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. The Bible is separated in two parts, Old Testament and New Testament. Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. And so you can follow along on your phone or tablet. If you want to grab one of the Bibles in front of you, we're going to read a lot of scripture this morning. So if you want to follow along and you didn't bring your Bible, there's one in front of you, and it's on page 371. Now, to set it up just a little bit, about 444 years before Jesus was born, there was this prophet named Nehemiah who lived in Jerusalem. And at this time, Jerusalem had been taken captive by its enemies because they had turned their backs against God. And God warned them that this could happen. He said, look, if you're going to worship other idols and other gods, I'm not going to protect you. And what's going to happen is your surrounding enemies, your surrounding countries are going to come in. They're going to take everyone captive. They're going to scatter everybody to who knows where. And it happened. Israel disobeyed God. They started worshiping other gods. And sure enough, that exactly what God said was going to happen happened. Now, Nehemiah was one of these guys that was in this group. Now, he wasn't one of the ones that was worshiping other idols and other gods. But guess what? He was plagued to what was happening to everyone else. And because of his role, he was taken back to one of the kings to serve as the king's cupbearer. Now, if you don't know what a cupbearer is the person who tastes all the wine before it's given to the king. And you say, wow, that doesn't sound like such a bad gig, sitting around tasting wine all day. And it's not a bad gig unless it's poisoned. Then it's a horrible gig because now you're dead and the king lives. So your job as a cupbearer is to taste all the wine and to take one for the king. So now we have Nehemiah, he's here, he's held captive, and he's faithfully serving the king every single day when he hears what has happened back in Jerusalem. Because when he was held captive, the walls were still standing, but as he was serving the king, the rumor got back to him that the walls had been destroyed. I mean, completely destroyed. And when he heard this, in chapter 1, we see that Nehemiah heard this. He sat down and he wept because the walls were so sacred to the Jewish people. These are the walls that have been up for decades, built by their ancestors, and they were very, very sacred. But he doesn't just sit there. Nehemiah gets up. He realizes that something has to be done. He musters up all the courage that he can get. He presses past his fears, and he prepares to boldly make his big request. And we pick up the story right here where Nehemiah is in the other room. He's preparing the wine. And like Pastor Dave said a couple weeks ago, right when you're about to do something that you're super nervous about, your knees are shaking, your hands are sweaty, your throat's dry, you're swallowing a lot, and you're hyperventilating a little bit, your heart's beating. I imagine this is Nehemiah. He's in there, he's getting the wine together, and he's like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I need to make this big request. And so we pick up on the story as he walks into the throne room, and the king and queen are sitting there, and he's walking up, and he's probably shaking, and he's about to give them the wine. And we see in chapter 2, verses 2 through 8. So the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Then I was terrified, but I replied. Time out. Stop right there. For the remainder of our time together this morning, I want everyone to kind of process through your own I'm terrified, but I need to reply moment. Maybe for some of you, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe you're still in the terrified portion of that statement and you're too scared to reply. Maybe you're in a situation where you don't know what the answer is. You don't know which way to turn. You don't know how to respond to that question. You don't know how to respond to that text or that email. You don't know how to react to that diagnosis. Back in 2005, Janet and I were living in Tennessee, and we just really felt like God was prompting us or asking us to go and launch into full-time occupational ministry, which being a pastor, what we're doing now. We were scared to death. We didn't know what that looked like. We knew that it wasn't going to be in Tennessee somewhere, and that scared us even more. We both had jobs, our kids were in schools, all of our family was right there kind of in the middle Tennessee area. We just had a brand new home that we had just had built. It was only about 4 or 5 years old. We didn't know what to do. But we quit our jobs, we sold our house, pulled our kids out of school, said our goodbyes to family. We were launched out to Colorado. We were absolutely terrified, but we replied. Each one of us has an area or a life situation or a season that we're either in right now, we're walking through right now, or we've walked through. And I just want to encourage you and let you know today that you may be terrified, but you can reply. So Nehemiah goes on to say, so the king had just asked Nehemiah, hey, what's going on with you? You look like something's bothering you. So Nehemiah picks up, long live the king, how can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, if it please the king, if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. The king, with the queen beside him, asked, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, he's thinking, wow, okay, I did it. I went through my first hurdle. Now I'm just going to keep on going here. If it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. Oh, and please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself. I love that. Hey, while I'm at it, hey, why don't you throw in some timber so I can build a home for myself too? And look at this. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. Here's the prophet Nehemiah with no resources, probably no hope, no possibility of, or we assume there's no possibility of a future. Yet instead of Nehemiah seeing a problem that he can't fix, he sees an opportunity to bring hope back to his people and bring honor back to his Lord. But before either of those two could even remotely happen, for him to be able to be put into that position, he had to take his first step through his fears. He had to look beyond his current circumstances and actually believe that the hand of God was on him. And it took courage, it took boldness, and Nehemiah bravely was saying, I can do this. I need to lead the charge. And it's going to start with this huge request. Though he was terrified, he replied. So let me ask you, when is the last time that you've allowed the realities of your current circumstances keep you from doing something that you feel God is either asking or kind of prompting you to do? What current realities are you allowing to serve as roadblocks from a mission or a dream or a vision or an accomplishment or a task? Write this down for number one. To be brave, I have to take the first step. To be brave, I have to take the first step. Now, Nehemiah didn't fully accomplish his mission by simply asking the king's permission, but it was his first huge step. So what is your first step? Remember, this whole series is titled Brave, and over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about that in order for us to pick up momentum in our life to move forward through our fears, we have to identify what our fears are first. If you say, I want to get out of debt, great. Is your first step joining a financial peace class? I want to go back to school, or I want a different job, okay? Maybe your first step is doing some research or enrolling in that first class. I want to start that business I've always dreamed of, or I want to start that ministry at church. Maybe your first step is talking to a church leader and making it happen. How about this? I want to stop that addiction. Maybe your first step is celebrate recovery on Monday nights. I want to rebuild my relationship with my kids. Maybe your first step is being home more and working less, or just starting a conversation with your kids. I want my spouse to forgive me. Maybe your first step is reaching out to a marriage counselor and seeing if you can set up some appointments. Or how about I want to begin a new relationship with Jesus starting today? Maybe your first step is just praying this morning. Maybe your first step, if that's you, was just getting here. You think all week long, man, that something needs to change. I feel like there's something missing. I know my friends and family have been inviting me to this church, New Life, and I think I'm going to try it out Sunday morning. I'm going to do it. And then this morning, just an hour ago, before you came, you were getting ready and your hands were sweating, your knees were knocking, your throat was dry, and you think, I can do this, I can do this. And if that is you, and if you are here, I just want to say, you did it. You did it. You stepped through your fear, and you're here. I have no idea what your first step should be. Only you can answer that question. But I do want to encourage you to just take a breath. Swallow really hard. Hold somebody's hand if you have to, and take that step. And then after you've bravely taken that first step, you can boldly make your next one, and your next one, and your next one. Now, Nehemiah's next step was when he got into town, when he got into Jerusalem. So once he got into Jerusalem, he started mobilizing all of his different teams. Now, on a side note, if you're in any type of leadership role at all, I just want to tell you, Nehemiah, his model of leadership is phenomenal. Okay, his model of leadership is used by church leaders and life coaches all over the world, and it is just exceptional. And I just want to encourage you to model this type of leadership. And I believe it was right here in the story, where Nehemiah realized that he had the most powerful and potent weapon in his arsenal, which is casting vision. Casting vision is the ability to paint a picture of the future that inspires passion and energy in others, and that's exactly what Nehemiah did. Now let's go back to the story. Chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Nehemiah, but now I said to them, this is Nehemiah talking to all the volunteers, all the people he just gathered together. You know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God was on me, about how my conversation with the king, and they replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. Nehemiah basically was saying, okay, look, everyone, this wall is going back up. Our ancestors built this wall. God gave this land to us, and it's going back up. I know it's been gone for a while, I've been a slave and servant to the king, but he gave me permission to come back. As a matter of fact, this pagan king that I work for gave us all the materials to make sure that we succeed. So it's going back up. The only thing I need is warm bodies. So who's with me? So they start on the wall. They're making progress. And lo and behold, guess who shows up? The city and all the rebels and everybody that tore the wall down in the first place. They show up and they're heckling them and they're calling them names and they're threatening them and they're doing all this stuff. And we pick that up in chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They asked. And then I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall. But you have no share, no legal right, and no historic claim in Jerusalem. I love this part of Nehemiah. I love his boldness, mainly because it sounds like he's a little redneck with them, which I can appreciate. He's basically telling them, hey, just stop right there. Don't say anything else. Get on your donkey or your camel, whatever you came in here on, and head on out. This has nothing to do with you. It's none of your business. And I love that. And then Sanballat, he takes it to another level. Day after day, he and his other city officials, they show up and they're calling them names and they're threatening them and they're making fun of all their rituals. And to some degree, it worked a little bit because the men kind of gathered around Nehemiah one day and they said, hey, look, we're a little worried here. We're defenseless and they could come in from any angle. We wouldn't see them coming and they could attack us. This is something we should do something about this. And Nehemiah says, okay. So he places armed guards at the lowest part of the wall where there are still cracks and seams where they could sneak in and attack them. And so he places armed guards there with spears and swords and bows. And he says this after he does that in chapter 4, verses 14 through 18. Then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. When our enemies heard that we knew of their plans and that God had frustrated them, we all returned to our work on the wall. But from then on, only half my men worked while the other half stood guard with spears and shields and bows and coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. The laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. All of the builders had a sword belted to their side. The trumpeter stayed with me to sound the alarm. Now that is some serious focus. But it doesn't end there. Finally, Sanballat, man, he is just livid. He's beside himself. He doesn't know what to do. So he sends 5 individual messages, 5 individual letters through messengers to Nehemiah, asking him to meet him so they can kind of talk about things. All right, we pick that up in chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. Now, I'm assuming they thought Nehemiah was born yesterday. But he wasn't. Nehemiah was much smarter than this because basically they're sending these letters and they're saying, hey, you remember all those times we showed up and we were threatening you? We were just kidding. Let's go have coffee. Let's go have lunch. But we can't do it here. Let's go do it way over there. Nehemiah knew what he was up to, and he said this, but they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I just love Nehemiah. Don't miss this. This is great. I am carrying on a great project and cannot come down. I'm carrying on a great project and cannot come down. Write this down for number 2. To be brave, I'm going to stay focused and determined. To be brave, I'm going to stay focused and determined. Nothing was going to keep Nehemiah from building this wall. Not even his life being threatened because he was so intensely focused on finishing this. Remember, Nehemiah had already walked through the scariest part of this entire journey, which was taking that first step by his big request to the king, can I go back? He was terrified, but he replied. And we don't see that language used anywhere else in this story. We don't see him being scared anywhere else in the story. We don't see him say, I was terrified, but I built teams to start on the wall. I was terrified, but I told the officials that has nothing to do with them. Or that I put armed guards where they needed to be. Or I couldn't come down off the wall because I was so scared. We don't see that. Nehemiah had this confidence and assurance that no matter what, this wall was going up. Was he still afraid? Maybe. We don't see it, but he may have been. But I believe that his focus and his intensity and his determination superseded any moments of fear that he had. Now, if you don't take anything else from this message today, I want you to get this, because this is so applicable to our lives and so relevant. Listen to this. Nehemiah's courage and his bravery to take his first step allowed him to be put into the position to tackle and conquer his wall. Nehemiah's bravery and courage to take his first step allowed him to be put in the position to tackle and conquer his wall. And guess what? Your courage and your bravery and my courage and my bravery for us to take our first step will allow us to be put into the position to tackle and conquer our wall. Now, just for context, I know most of the time when we hear the word wall, we think of kind of a negative thing. We hear don't put up relational walls, and that's true. But for today, walls for us mean simply a big task, something critical in our lives that we need to fix or address. So what's your wall? What's the big task that you feel needs to be accomplished in your life? Something you really need to work on. Because we can go back to all of the examples that we gave earlier that we said we could take steps in these, and those could actually serve as walls for us to accomplish. And remember, as soon as you go past that big step and you start on that thing that God has prompted you to do, the enemy and the distraction is going to come. For Nehemiah, his enemy and his distraction was very tangible. His enemy showed up in the flesh every single day to try to distract him and stop him and even kill him. But our enemy, most of the time, is not that easy to see. Nearly every time our distractions come in other forms. I want to get out of debt, but there's this new car. No, you stay focused and determined. I want to go back to school, but I'm too old. No, stay focused and determined. I want to start that new business, or I'm going to start that new ministry, but it'll probably fail. No, you stay focused and determined. I want to stop this addiction, but I'm afraid of relapse. I want to rebuild my relationship with my kids, but I know they hate me. I want my spouse to forgive me, but it's probably too late. I want to begin a relationship with Jesus, but if you only knew what I've done. No, those are all distractions. Stay focused and determined. When those distractions come, they're going to say, hey, take your focus off of that. Take the focus off your wall right now and come over here so we can talk. And that's when we need to have the courage and the boldness of Nehemiah. Nehemiah said, I am carrying on a great project and cannot come down. In other words, we need to say, no, I'm making too good of progress. I've already crossed that big step I needed to take, and I cannot be distracted. I will not be distracted. Our enemy wants to keep us from ever accomplishing our task, but more importantly, he wants to keep us from ever taking that big step. If he can scare us or intimidate us or distract us from ever taking that big step, he doesn't have to worry about us ever getting to our wall. He'll stop us before we even begin, but we cannot have a finish until we have a start. Nehemiah had a good finish. And because Nehemiah was so crazy and intensely brave and focused on getting that wall up, they built the entire structure in 52 days. 52 days. Imagine your finish. Picture your end result. Visualize your task being accomplished. Imagine being debt-free. Imagine starting that first class. Imagine that first day of your business. Imagine that first day of that new ministry. Imagine being 30 days sober. Imagine your kids initiating that hug and kiss. Imagine that healthy, happy date night the way it used to be. Imagine that new relationship with Jesus. And I wonder if we were to stay as focused and intense and engaged and determined as Nehemiah was building his wall, I wonder how quick it would be for us as well. Now, Nehemiah, after he built the wall, he actually served as governor for 12 years. He stayed and served as governor for 12 years. And during this time, he did a lot of great things for the Jewish people. He abolished some of the rules and regulations that the enemy put on them, and he was able to bring back some of their rituals that they coveted so much. But do you know what Nehemiah did? After he built this wall in 52 days, and after he served as governor for 12 years, you know what he did? He went back to the king, because he made a promise and he wasn't going to break it. And it doesn't say in scripture, but because I do have this big imagination, I imagine that first day being back, the king and queen sitting in the throne room. Maybe they got a temporary cupbearer for the last 12 years, but this day, Nehemiah walks in. He's already tasted the wine, it's good. He takes it to the king and he says, "Hey, I'm back. Thank you. Because you did what you did, I was able to do what I did. And I just want to say thank you." This is a pagan king, a godless king, and God worked through him to help Nehemiah accomplish his task. So as we wrap up, here's my challenge to you. Nehemiah's task and mission from God was just to rebuild a wall. And you think, man, that seems so meaningless. But it was sacred to them. And the thing that you need to build or rebuild is sacred to you. What needs your attention? What's the big pressing thing in your life that you need to pay attention to, that needs to be addressed? You may already know what it is. I think most of us do. But ask yourself, man, what is it? What task? What mission? What goal? What do I feel like God's prompting me to do? And what is it that God's asking me to focus on? And once you address it, once you acknowledge it, man, get stubborn. Stay focused, stay determined until it's done. Nehemiah's passion and his determination for the end result allowed him to take this deep breath, go through that first step, which positioned him to accomplish his wall and enabled him to go back to the king and say, "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." And you and I need to identify what it is we need to do so that we can take our first big step, which will put us into the position to conquer our wall so that we can go back to our King, Jesus, and say, "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity, God, that you have given me to just speak what I feel like were your words to all of us this morning. Lord, this entire series of Being Brave is really speaking to a lot of people. We've heard a lot of people in their own personal stories about needing to be brave in certain areas of their life. And Lord, you know exactly what step we need to take. God, we're terrified. I mean, there's certain steps you want us to take towards things, and looking from behind the scenes, it just looks so scary. So God, right now in these moments, I just pray that you will just reveal to each one of us, Lord, what is it? What is it that you want us to accomplish? And how can we take that first big step? God, give us the courage, give us the boldness, give us the strength to look right at it and take that first big step. And once we're on the side of that, on that big step, God, we can look at you and say, "Wow, you helped me do that." Now on to accomplishing the task. God, throughout this week, as we go our separate ways, Lord, I just pray that in our quiet times, in our still times, Lord, you would just completely mess with us and encourage us and push us beyond that first step. Whether it's building relationships, whether it's building relationships with others, building a relationship with you, Lord, getting out of debt, stopping that addiction, whatever it is, Lord, Lord, just show us what that first step is. And then give us exactly what we need to step into it. Lord, we love you, we honor you, and I thank you for everyone that's here. We give all this to you in Jesus' name.